Although it was called Inner Mongolia, this place was actually not far from Heilongjiang, almost bordering Outer Mongolia. Most of the residents here were Han Chinese, with only a small number of Manchu and Mongol people. Our youth team consisted of 6 people in total, 4 men and 2 women. As soon as we arrived, everyone was wide-eyed all around. There were only undulating mountain ranges stretching for thousands of miles and endless primeval forests. 10 miles from the village, not a single person could be seen. This place originally had no road access, so electricity was out of the question. Even a kerosene lamp was a special privilege for cadres, and a room with a flashlight was like a presidential mansion. City dwellers could not have imagined such a thing. At that time, we still thought that tall buildings and large shops, electric lights, and telephones were readily available everywhere in the country. However, we found it very new then, as we had never seen such majestic mountain ranges, let alone tasted so many mountain delicacies for the first time. The surrounding mountains were relatively rich in produce. Fish filled the rivers, so there was no worry about food. Later, when we returned to the city and heard stories from friends who went to Xianxia, we realized how hard they had it, barely getting a decent meal for several years. The work for the educated youths was not too heavy, because this place was close to the mountains with plenty of firewood and near the river with lots of fish, so farming was not too strenuous. However, on summer evenings, we had to take turns guarding the crops in the fields. To prevent wild animals from damaging the fields, 2 people had to sleep out in the fields each night to keep watch. The fields here were not lush, sprawling green expanses like those in the North China Plain, but often scattered in patches wherever the ground was flat enough to plow. So at night, we had to walk around to guard them. That night, it was my turn with Fatty Tuyen. He slept in the tent while I went out for a patrol. Seeing nothing, I returned to the tent to get some sleep. As I neared the tent, I suddenly saw a round white shadow not far from the grass hut. I rubbed my eyes to get a clear look, sure it wasn't my imagination, but it was too dark to make out what it was. Back then, I didn't believe in ghosts, so I guessed it was some animal. I picked up a stick, intending to scare it away. A bright white mass in the pitch. Black night swaying slightly. What could it be? That thing didn't look like an animal, but if it wasn't an animal, how could it be moving? Although I wasn't afraid of ghosts, when facing something unknown, I still felt cautious and didn't dare swing the stick directly. The stick I held was actually just a branch I had picked up off the ground. I gently poked the blurry white mass with the branch, and it felt very soft. Suddenly, in the dim darkness, I heard Fatty Tuyen exclaim angrily, "Hey! What are you doing, Hu Bayi? Why are you poking my butt with a stick?" I was startled. It turned out to be Fatty Tuyen. He had eaten something bad in the morning and had a stomachache in the middle of the night, so he was squatting there to relieve himself. His pale white butt looked very conspicuous in the dark. Early the next morning, Fatty Tuyen insisted I compensate him, claiming I had scared him to death the previous night, causing millions of his brain cells to die. I retorted, "Do you even have that many brain cells? Both you and I are dirt poor, following the state's highest directive to the countryside to receive essential education from the impoverished central class. What do I have to compensate you with? I told you before, as your close revolutionary comrade, I assure you that all my worldly possessions are just the clothes I'm wearing right now. You're not going to make me take off my pants to pay you back, are you?" Fatty Tuyen laughed heartily and said, "No need for that. The other day, I found a huge beehive in Duan Mountain Forest. Let's go knock it down, get some honey to drink, and trade the rest to Yanzi's dad for rabbit meat." Yanzi was a girl's name. Her father was a renowned old hunter in the village, and Fatty Tuyen and I lived with their family. The father and daughter often went hunting in the forest and invited us to eat game meat every few days. However, eating delicious food at someone else's house for so long made us feel uneasy. The problem was, we 2 guys were truly too poor and had nothing to offer Yanzi and her father in return. Afraid of getting lost, I borrowed Yanzi's hunting dog. This dog was medium-sized, raised by Yanzi since it was a puppy. She named it Little Yellow. Since it wasn't fully grown, she hadn't taken it hunting yet. Now, seeing us say we were going to the mountains to play for a while, Yanzi immediately let us take it along. As the crow flies, Duan Mountain was not far from our village, but since there was no direct path, we had to climb hills and cross streams for a long time to reach it. This forest was vast, and the villagers had warned us not to enter, as bears were rumored to appear there. We had even met a man in the village with only half a face. We heard that when he was young, he encountered a bear in the forest. Fortunately, Yanzi's father arrived in time to save him, firing his gun to chase the bear away. But the bear still licked his face once. The bear's rough tongue was covered with dense fleshy spines, and just one lick could tear away a large piece of flesh. To this day, the left half of that man's face had no ear or eye, and his mouth and nose were distorted. At over 40 years old, he had never married, and the old folks in the village would get teary-eyed whenever they spoke of his story. Although we were bold, we didn't dare venture deep into the ancient forest. The beehive Fatty Tuyen spoke of was actually dangling from a large tree branch near a small stream at the edge of the forest. He had discovered it when he went with the villagers to collect pine resin. What I hadn't expected was how enormous this beehive was. It was larger than all the beehives we had ever disturbed combined. From a distance, it looked like a legless calf hanging upside down from a large branch, with countless huge wasps buzzing frantically inside, their droning sounds grating on one's ears. Seeing this, I swore at Fatty Tuyen. "Damn it, are you playing a prank on me? Is that your beehive? It's an atomic bomb. If we poke it, our faces will be blown off." Fatty Tuyen grinned and said, "Exactly. If it were a normal beehive, why would I call you? I could handle it myself with one reach." "So, still dare to do it?" I heard that and immediately said, "What's the big deal? Our team is invincible. We weren't even afraid of American imperialist airplanes and tanks, so why would we be scared of these tiny wasps? Damn it, they're all paper tigers. Today, my brothers and I are definitely going to eat honey." Even though I said that, we couldn't be reckless. Just a little carelessness, and we would surely be stung to death by those hornets. These wasps were so big, they must be venomous. We wouldn't need many stings, just one or two would send us to the afterlife. Fortunately, there was a stream nearby. It seemed heaven was helping us. First, I broke a biscuit in half, fed it to Little Yellow, and sent him running far away. Then the two of us donned two baggy military uniforms, put on dog skin hats, wrapped scarves around our necks, and secured our gloves tightly. In front of our hats, we draped a transparent gauze cloth borrowed from the educated youth women. After checking that no skin was exposed, I told Fatty Tuyen to find 2 hollow reed stalks. Each of us took one to use for breathing when we jumped into the stream to escape the bees. Having prepared everything, we lumbered like 2 clumsy bears towards the base of the tree. I held a handful of dongzi grass and a matchbox, ready. Fatty Tuyen held the pole and counted 1, 2, 3. As soon as he counted to 3, the pole strongly poked the connection between the branch and the hive. With just a few jabs, the enormous beehive fell to the ground with a thud. From inside, tens of thousands of plump hornets swarmed out, quickly forming a dense black cloud that hung in the air, emitting a deafening buzz over our heads. I was quite well prepared. Despite the bees' attack, I brazenly lit the dongzi grass in my hand and placed it right next to the hive's opening. Choked by the smoke, the huge bees, disoriented, flew out in a frantic frenzy. Fatty Tuyen and I quickly piled mud around the burning dry grass to create a fire break, preventing the fire from spreading to the entire forest. At that moment, the bees that hadn't been choked by smoke had clearly identified their targets and furiously charged at us, heedless of their lives. I felt as if thousands of hailstones were pelting my head. Without stopping for even half a step, Fatty Tuyen and I quickly plunged into the nearby stream. The stream wasn't very deep, less than a meter. After the splash, we hit the bottom, and the bees clinging to us were immediately washed away by the water. I held my dog skin hat firmly with one hand to prevent it from being swept away by the water, and with the other hand, I pulled out a hollow reed stalk and raised it to breathe. After a while, I dared to poke my head up. Seeing the swarm of bees, some choking on water, some on smoke, the situation was no longer dangerous. Although it was mid-summer, the rivers and streams in the mountains were still very cold. My whole body was trembling. With great difficulty, I crawled onto the bank and lay on the rocky strip, breathing deeply, letting the warm sunlight warm my body. The feeling was indescribably pleasant. Not long after, Fatty Tuyen, unable to bear it any longer, also shiveringly crawled up. He had only made it halfway when he suddenly let out a cry, his arms swinging up abruptly. For some reason, a long gash had appeared on his arm, bleeding profusely. I rushed down to help Fatty Tuyen. He squeezed the wound tightly and said, "Be careful. There seems to be a broken bowl under the stream. It cut me terribly." There were no residents nearby, so why would there be a broken bowl here? My curiosity was piqued. I quickly stripped off my clothes and dived naked into the stream to search. Where Fatty Tuyen had been cut and bled, I found half of a porcelain bowl. Looking closely at its style and blue pattern, it somewhat resembled the blue and white porcelain from the Northern Song dynasty that my grandfather used to collect. But my grandfather's paintings, calligraphy, and antiques had all been smashed by the Red Guards during the struggle sessions. I never expected to see fragments of such an antique in this remote mountain valley. It felt quite familiar, but ultimately they held no value for me. With that thought, I swung my arm and threw the bowl shard into the forest. Fatty Tuyen also took off all his clothes, hastily bandaged his wound, and then jumped into the stream again. After we bathed, we spread our clothes, shoes, and socks on the gravel bank to dry. I whistled a long note to call Little Yellow back. Little Yellow came running from afar, carrying a plump wild rabbit in its mouth. I don't know how that unfortunate rabbit ended up in the jaws of this apprentice hunting dog. When I saw the rabbit, I was overjoyed and rolled around on the ground with the dog a few times. What a great hunting dog! I immediately broke off a honey-soaked honeycomb from the hive and rewarded it. Fatty Tuyen said, "After this, we can ask the villagers for some puppies to raise. Soon we'll have plenty of rabbit meat to eat." I replied, "Don't dream. How many wild rabbits would satisfy your wolf's maw? Stop boasting. I'm hungry. You take care of that rabbit, I'll go gather firewood." Fatty Tuyen sat by the stream, cleaning the rabbit from the inside out. I gathered a pile of dry pine branches and lit a fire. I spread a thick layer of wild honey over the skinned rabbit and roasted it. Before long, the fragrant smell of roasted rabbit with honey permeated the air. I cut off the rabbit's head for Little Yellow. The remaining meat was halved, and Fatty Tuyen and I each devoured our share with gusto. I had never eaten anything so delicious in my life. I almost swallowed my fingers. Although there was no salt, oil, or seasoning, basting the rabbit with wild honey and roasting it over pine wood gave it a unique flavor. City dwellers could never imagine such delicious food existed in this world. After a satisfying meal, seeing that it was getting late and our clothes were almost dry, we used a large branch to skewer the beehive. We carried it back, one in front, one behind, singing revolutionary songs loudly. The sky is vast, the earth is vast, but not as vast as the determination of our people. Close as mother, close as father, but not as close as the affection of our party. It was truly cracking the whip on the galloping horse, bells ringing and dancing, singing a song of advance. The only discordant note was Little Yellow's excited barks mixed with our heroic singing, which made me feel exactly like the Japanese invaders landing in a village in a movie. Upon returning to the village, I saw that more than half of the villagers were gone. I asked Yanzi, "Yanzi, where have your dad and everyone else gone?" Yanzi helped us lift down the beehive and replied, "The Chakana River flooded, and all the timber in the timber farm was submerged." All the villagers ran to help move the timber at noon. The party branch secretary told me to tell you guys to guard the crops carefully and not cause any trouble. They won't be back for another 7 or 8 days. I hated hearing anyone tell me not to cause trouble, as if I was born to spread disaster everywhere. Hearing this, I immediately said to Yanzi, "The secretary must be drunk and talking nonsense. We haven't caused any trouble, have we? We are all Chairman Mao's good grandchildren." Yanzi laughed and said, "Are you sure you haven't caused any trouble? Since you educated youths arrived here, all the village hens have been so scared that none of them lay eggs anymore. My 2 comrades from the team had also gone to the timber farm, leaving only me, Fatty Tuyen, and 2 other girls. We too had run off to play, so we weren't called to the timber farm to move timber. What a stroke of luck, we thought. We poured the honey into jars, filling more than 10 jars in total. Yanzi said the leftover honeycomb could be cooked, and she would make us stir fried venison with honeycomb for dinner. At the mention of food, Fatty Tuyen's eyes lit up. He said today was like New Year's, having roasted rabbit for afternoon tea and then stir fried venison with honeycomb for dinner. He was already drooling. Yanzi asked where we had roasted the meat. I told her the whole story. Yanzi listened and then exclaimed, "Oh my goodness, don't be so reckless. Roasting rabbit meat at the edge of the forest. What if the delicious smell lures a man? Bear out." Hearing Yanzi, we suddenly realized how dangerous it was. Fortunately, nothing happened. Perhaps the bear was sleeping that day and didn't catch the scent of the roasted meat. I helped Yanzi light the stove while recounting how Fatty Tuyen had cut his hand on a broken bowl shard in the stream, wondering why there were Northern Song Dynasty blue and white porcelain shards in such a remote mountain wilderness. Yanzi heard this and said, "What's so strange about that? Whenever someone in our village gets married, each family has several jars for dowry, and all those things are fished out of the stream." The more I heard, the stranger it became. Could ancient artifacts be fished out of the stream? Seeing my confusion, Yanzi reached under the bed and pulled out 2 porcelain jars to show me. They don't grow out of the stream on their own, they all wash down from upstream. Several rivers near our village originate from Buffalo Heart Mountain in Lama Valley. The old people say that mountain has the tomb of an empress from the Jin or Liao dynasties. The burial artifacts inside are all very old. Many people have wanted to find that tomb, but either they couldn't find it, or they went in and couldn't find their way out. The forest in Lama Valley is very dense. My dad even said he saw wild people around there, and some people even say there are ghosts in Buffalo Heart Mountain. No one has dared to go in there for years. While we were talking, night had fallen without us noticing. Yanzi had almost finished cooking. Fatty Tuyen went to call the 2 other girls for dinner, but after he had been gone for a while, he and the girl named Wang ran back, breathless. I quickly asked what was wrong. Wang panted for a moment before explaining clearly. It turned out her friend Tian Xiaomeng, who was staying with Wang had received a letter from home. The letter said her mother had asthma and was hospitalized, and her condition seemed quite serious. Tian Xiaomeng had heard people say that there was a bodhisattva fruit in Lama Valley that was very effective for treating asthma, so she had gone into the forest alone to look for it. She had left early in the morning and still hadn't returned. I heard this, and the veins pulsed at my temples. This Tian Xiaomeng was really reckless. That was a primeval forest. Even experienced local hunters didn't dare go in casually. How could she go alone? Wang cried, saying she couldn't stop Xiaomeng, and urged everyone to quickly go look for her, lest something happen and they wouldn't know what to do. But at that moment, all the working men in the village had gone to the timber farm, leaving only the elderly and children. It seemed only Fatty Tuyen and I could go. Yanzi also took Little Yellow and a hunting rifle to accompany us, while Wang stayed behind to guard the crops. With a dog in the mountains, there was no fear of getting lost. We dared not delay, quickly lit torches and rushed into the forest with Little Yellow. In the deep mountains and dense forests, there was fundamentally no path. I truly couldn't understand Tian Xiaomeng. How could a girl dare to venture alone into such a remote and deep valley? Fatty Tuyen said perhaps she was too worried and wasn't thinking clearly. Who wouldn't be worried when their mother was seriously ill? It was dark, and we had to rely on Little Yellow to sniff out the trail, but it had never been formally trained, so it kept losing the scent, forcing us to go back and search again. Thus, we moved very slowly. A journey that normally took 4 or 5 hours now took the 3 of us an entire night. Dawn was breaking in the east, and the early morning wind in the ancient forest gave us goosebumps. The fresh morning air invigorated our spirits. Yanzi pointed west and said, "Look, you two. That big mountain is Buffalo Heart Mountain." Fatty Tuyen and I followed her GS direction. Within the vast mountain range covered by an endless sea of forest, a huge, strangely shaped mountain stood majestically. The entire mountain resembled a buffalo's heart, with 9 white waterfalls cascading down like 9 swirling jade dragons. The porcelain that villagers collected must have been washed out by these waterfalls. It seemed the tomb of the Liao Empress might indeed be within the mountain, but no one had ever found the entrance. When I saw that majestic mountain range, I suddenly had a very strange feeling. I swear to Chairman Mao, I seem to have seen this mountain range somewhere before. After pondering for a while, I finally remembered that this was a diagonal section in the fragmentary book my grandfather left behind, which I often opened to read in my leisure time. This landscape layout was the best feng shui for a burial site. Facing a river in front, leaning against a mountain behind, with 9 waterfalls gushing like 9 dragons drawing water, dividing the mountain into the shape of a blooming lotus. That's right, this layout was called 9 dragons grasping the jade lotus. For the 9 waterfalls on the mountain, if there was one more or one less, or if the water flow was not large enough, it could not be called the 9 dragons grasping the jade lotus layout. The number 9 is the largest unit, signifying supreme, most honorable, and its pronunciation is similar to Ju, meaning long, lasting, implying eternal, enduring. Therefore, from ancient times to the present, it has been considered the luckiest number. Furthermore, if the water volume is not large enough, it cannot be called a dragon, but only a snake. This type of precious feng shui burial site also had another name, Luo Shen Lian. The book recorded that such a layout was most suitable for burying women. If a man were buried there, his family would be unlucky for generations. At that moment, a thought lingered in my mind. My grandfather's 16. Character Yin, Yang Feng Shui Secret Arts was not some feudal superstition. The book's content recorded actual events and things. I would definitely reread it carefully when I returned. However, I didn't see any value in this feng shui art. In ancient China, how many emperors and ministers died without carefully choosing a plot of land for burial? Yet dynasties still changed, and history's course swung between prosperity and decline. Could it really be decided by ancestral graves? Yanzi pointed to the deep valley in front of Buffalo Heart Mountain and said, "This is the famous Llama Valley. They say there are wild people in there, and at night there are even ghosts." Fatty Tuyen looked at the dense, dark, primeval forest, frowned, and said, "No wonder Xiaomeng got lost going into this valley. We only have 3 people and 1 dog. Finding her won't be easy." Seeing that they seemed disheartened, I encouraged them. Communist materialists should not believe in ghosts and spirits. Whether it's ghosts or wild people, if they encounter me, they'll be out of luck. I'll capture a few alive and take them back to Beijing as a gift for Chairman Mao. He'll surely be surprised. Both Fatty Tuyen and I came from military families. We inherently possessed a fearless and audacious quality. Hearing what I said, he immediately perked up, rolled up his sleeves and pant legs, and advanced into the deep valley. Only Yanzi remained worried. Yanzi, after all, was a local. She had heard countless scary stories about Llama Valley since childhood, so it was understandable that an underlying fear had formed in her mind. However, rescuing someone was important now, so she had to put aside her fears and follow us. The 3 of us sat down to eat some dry rations, checked our equipment, and prepared to set off. The 3 of us had 2 guns, both belonging to Yanzi and her father. One was a 3-barreled shotgun, and the other was a homemade Orichan rifle. Both were very outdated. They had to be loaded with powder before firing. At close range, their destructive power was significant, but if shooting at targets beyond 30 meters, their accuracy and bullet velocity were not very reliable. They were barely suitable for hunting deer or rabbits. When I was 6 years old, my father took me to a shooting range to play with guns. I was proficient with all types of pistols and rifles of the People's Liberation Army. But with this type of muzzle-loading hunting rifle, I wasn't sure I could handle it. Fatty Tuyen was not much different from me. After a discussion, Yanzi and I each took a gun, while Fatty Tuyen carried a wood chopping knife. Once sufficiently prepared, the 3 of us began to enter the dense forest in Llama Valley. In Lama Valley, compared to the legendary ghosts and wild people, bears were still the most direct and real threat. Although bears and black bears are both bears, bears prefer to walk upright like humans, hence their name. This species of bear is large and muscular. Hunters have to team up and bring a pack of hunting dogs to dare attack it. If one were alone with a shoddy gun and encountered this vicious animal deep in the forest, it would be a death sentence. We walked for half a day in the forest. The roaring sound of water from the 9 waterfalls on Buffalo Heart Mountain grew clearer and clearer. We realized we had reached the other end of Lama Valley, apparently close to the foot of Buffalo Heart Mountain. We encountered neither bears nor ghosts, nor did we see any sign of Tian Xiaomeng. Fatty Tuyan plopped himself down on the ground, saying exhaustedly, "Stop. I really can't go on." Yanzi immediately said, "Everyone, let's rest for a bit. Little Yellow doesn't seem to have picked up any scent of Xiaomeng. Oh, this isn't good. What if we don't find her? The secretary and my dad will scold us to death when they get back." I was quite tired myself. I grabbed my water bottle and gulped down several mouthfuls, then said to the two, "Surely Tian Xiaomeng hasn't become bear prey? Or was she captured by wild people and taken back as a tribal chief's wife?" We were resting and chatting when Little Yellow suddenly charged into the dense forest, barking wildly. Hunting dogs are excellent breeds. They absolutely never bark wildly like that unless they encounter something dangerous. I asked Yanzi, "What's wrong with the dog? Did it find a wild animal?" Yanzi's face turned pale. "Quick! Climb a tree quickly. There's a bear." As soon as I heard the words bear, I immediately scrambled up a large tree branch, looking down to see Yanzi struggling to push Fatty Tuyan's butt up. This guy couldn't climb trees at all. He just desperately hugged the trunk, inching up bit by bit. Seeing this, I quickly slid back down and together with Yanzi, pushed him up. With great effort, Fatty Tuyan finally managed to climb onto the nearest large fork in the tree. He lay face down, clinging tightly to the branch, sweating profusely, and called down, "Oh, my poor self. Damn this tree. It's so tall." Little Yellow's barking grew more urgent. Before Yanzi and I could climb the tree, a pitch black bear charged out from the thicket. Seeing people, the bear immediately stood on its hind legs in excitement and roared like thunder. Yanzi had hunted in the mountains with her father for many years and had a lot of experience. Without thinking much, she immediately raised her gun, aimed directly at the bear, and fired. There was a bang, sparks flew, and the bullet hit the bear's belly. The distance was close, and the bear's abdomen was its softest spot. The shot had carved a large hole in the vicious beast's belly, and fresh blood and intestines spilled out. The injured bear was furious. It stuffed the pile of intestines back into its belly with its paw, and frantically charged towards Yanzi. Her hunting rifle couldn't fire continuously, and behind her were only thorny trees, so she couldn't run anywhere. She could only close her eyes and wait for death. Saving lives was paramount. Without further hesitation, I quickly aimed my gun at the bear's head. If this shot missed, Yanzi would be done for. Thinking this, my hand trembled slightly. I immediately gritted my teeth and pulled the trigger. A loud boom echoed. The recoil of the Orachun rifle sent me sprawling to the ground, almost tumbling several times. I'm not sure if the destructive power wasn't great enough or if I aimed poorly, but although the bullet hit the bear's head, it only blinded one of its eyes. Although that shot wasn't fatal, it saved Yanzi. The bear was blinded in one eye, its face covered in blood, with half of an eyeball still dangling from its socket. The vicious beast became even more frantic and ferocious, abandoning Yanzi and charging straight towards me. At this moment, Little Yellow bit the bear's leg hard from behind. The bear spun around, intending to grab Little Yellow, but the dog was very vigilant. Seeing its opponent turn, it immediately ran far away, baring its sharp teeth, challenging the bear. In that instant, Yanzi and I quickly seized a precious 10 seconds. Each of us immediately climbed a tree. The bear was not lightly injured. Its intestines were spilling out, blood was streaming, and one eye was blind. In this forest, even a tiger feared it somewhat, and never before had it suffered such a disadvantage. It wanted to rush out and catch Little Yellow, but a bear could not run as fast as a hunting dog. It wanted to tear us apart, but all three of us had climbed trees. It circled the base of the tree several times, full of resentment, but for a moment it didn't know what to do. So it raised its head and roared like thunder, a sound that shook the entire mountain forest. Lying prone on the tree, I saw the bear below pacing back and forth in frustration, completely forgetting the dangerous situation. I found it amusing and called out to Fatty Tuyen, "Hey, Fatty, why hasn't your uncle left yet? Why is he pacing like he's flipping eggs down there? Advise your uncle to leave, don't think foolish thoughts." Fatty Tuyen wasn't afraid of bears, but mainly afraid of heights. In modern medical terms, it was acrophobia. So he lay prone, clinging tightly to the branch, trembling. But seeing my taunt, he refused to be outdone and cursed back, "Hu Bayi, you immoral scoundrel. Look clearly before you speak. That's not my uncle down there, it looks more like your wife." I burst out laughing, then pointed at the bear below and said, "Oh?" I looked wrong. It turns out to be Fatty's aunt. "I don't want to be your uncle. In law, you know." Fatty Tuyen was so angry he almost picked a pine cone to throw at me, but both his hands were busy clinging to the branch, fearing he would fall to the ground if he let go, so he didn't dare make any strong movements, only glaring. I found Fatty Tuyen's expression even funnier, but my smile immediately froze. The mad bear below began to disregard everything, climbing directly up the tree where I was hiding. Although the bear was heavy, it was very strong. Injured, the pain had made it completely lose its reason. In its eyes now, there were only the three of us and one dog. Its remaining eye was bloodshot, and the fleshy spines on its paws clung firmly to the tree trunk. Its huge body lunged upwards 1 meter with a single push. I cursed silently, "Damn whoever said dog. Bears can't climb trees, huh? You want to mess with me?" In the past, when entering the forest, old hunters often warned the young people, better to fight a fierce tiger than a mad bear. Because a wounded bear that goes crazy has unimaginable destructive power and brutality. My face turned pale with fear, and I no longer had the heart to joke with Fatty Tuyen. All I could think of was finding a way to escape. At that moment, Yanzi reminded me, quickly load more bullets. Shoot its other eye quickly." Only then did I remember the hunting rifle strapped to my back. While scolding myself for being useless, I climbed a bit higher up the tree towards the crown, took off my belt, and tied it to a large branch strong enough to bear my weight. Then, holding on firmly with one hand, using the gun to keep my balance, I poured half the powder from the horn tube into the gun barrel with my other hand. The bear climbed incredibly fast, getting closer to me by the moment. Yanzi and Fatty Tuyen were sweating cold. I tried to focus my attention on loading the powder, trying not to think about the fierce bear approaching me. After loading the powder, came the bullet. It had to be rammed tightly with an iron rod. My temples and nostrils were dripping with sweat. This kind of hunting rifle was truly troublesome. If the barrel burst, I'd be dead. In this northeast mountain region, how many hunters had lost their precious lives because they didn't even have a fast firing gun? At that moment, if only I had a Type 56 automatic rifle, I would have taken on even 3 or 5 more bears. Otherwise, a pistol would still do. Immediately after I loaded the bullet and changed the primer, the vicious beast's sharp claws were already pressing against my foot. I quickly pulled my foot back, then swiftly swung the gun barrel downwards, aimed directly at the bear's head, and pulled the trigger. This time, because I had put in too much gunpowder, thick smoke billowed out, blackening my face. The bullet, compressed in the barrel, was propelled by the explosive force, but because the angle was too low, it was loose and couldn't unleash its full power. Moreover, I was firing the gun with one hand, without any support behind me, so even at such close range, it still went astray in the end, hitting the bear's shoulder instead of its head. The bear fell from a height of more than 10 meters with a loud thud. Below, there were several inches of thick, dry leaves and rotten branches, so falling from that height didn't faze it at all. The bear got up again. This time it didn't climb, but roared loudly, slamming its muscular body against the tree trunk like a heavy tank, causing pine needles and cones to rain down. Fortunately, I had hooked my arm into the belt hanging on the branch, so I didn't fall. My only worry was that the tree wasn't strong enough. If the bear slammed it a few more times, it might even be uprooted. I never expected to die in this sacred and perilous forest today. In my final moments, I shouldn't lose face. I should at least regain some of the majestic spirit of a revolutionary soldier who sacrifices for the greater good. I had to let Fatty Tuyen and Yanzi see that I, Hu, was no ordinary person. Thinking this, I called out loudly to Yanzi and Fatty Tuyen, "It looks like I'm going to meet Karl Marx." "Excuse me, comrades, I'm going ahead. I'll save a spot for you. Do you have any messages for our revolutionary mentors? I'll pass them on." Fatty Tuyen, lying on a tree 10 meters away from me, called back, "Comrade Hu Bayi, you can rest assured on your way. The revolutionary cause won't get better with you, nor worse without you. Just go to Old Marx and study revolutionary theory well. I heard they eat beef stew with potatoes there. Can you get used to it?" I replied, "When have revolutionaries ever been picky eaters? Comrade Fatty, the revolutionary cart hasn't overturned yet, so you too must keep pushing it forward. Red flags flutter, the people carry sickles, seizing power from the wicked armies. 2/3 of the poor people in the world are waiting for you to liberate them. I'm off to eat beef stew with potatoes." Yanzi burst into tears. "What time is it now, and you two are still joking? Quickly think of something." Just when we were at our wits' end, the bear suddenly stopped hitting the tree and sat down heavily on the ground, panting. It turned out that due to excessive blood loss and continuous thrashing, despite its terrifying strength, the bear had finally reached its limit. Its madness had subsided considerably, waiting for us to exhaust ourselves before striking again. Little Yellow also knew the bear was formidable, so it didn't dare come near. It just squatted far away. It must have been very hungry, but because it was absolutely loyal to its owner, it refused to go off and find food alone. Yanzi felt sorry for the dog and whistled for Little Yellow to go find food by itself, and it trudged away. The three of us lay on the tree discussing countermeasures, but after thinking it over and over, there really was no other way. To risk going down now with these ancient guns would be suicide. All the villagers had gone, so waiting for rescue was impossible. To avoid falling, each of us had to tie ourselves tightly to a branch with our belts, then wait to see who could last longer. So we were at an impasse. This stalemate was very unfavorable for the three of us. The terrifying life and death struggle with the bear earlier had almost exhausted our strength. It was also getting dark, and none of us had slept for more than 2 days and a night. Now, both hungry and sleepy, we feared we would collapse and fall to the ground before dawn. The situation reminded me of a poem by Chairman Mao. The enemy encircles us in layers, but we stand firm, unyielding, and unafraid. However, there were no fluttering canopies in the mountains, only the man, bear squatting waiting. Lost in thought, drowsiness suddenly overtook me. I lay face down on the tree and fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept. When I felt a gnawing hunger and aches all over my body, I woke up. I saw countless stars in the sky and a crescent moon. It must have been late at night. The entire forest was silent. I used the moonlight to observe. The bear was no longer at the base of the tree. No one knew when it had left. The trees were too dense for me to clearly see if Yanzi and Fatty Tuyen were still in the trees, so I called out loudly, "Yanzi? Fatty, are you two still in the trees?" I called several times continuously, my voice echoing throughout the mountains and forest, but no one answered. Although I was bold, the thought of being alone and lost in the deep forest made my hair stand on end. I secretly cursed those two good, for nothings for forgetting me, not even bothering to call out when they left. I called out twice more, still no movement. Worried, I looked in all directions and spotted a flickering light not far ahead. I didn't expect anyone to still be living here. Had those two seen the light and gone there to find help? The night was as black as ink, making it impossible to distinguish directions. I only heard the rushing sound of water. I had to look up to find the Big Dipper. The light probably came from Buffalo Heart Mountain. I climbed down and limped towards it. I began to imagine the owner of that light as a kind, enthusiastic, and hospitable old hunter with a long white beard. Upon meeting an educated youth like me, lost in the forest, he would surely warmly welcome me, offer hot tea and roasted deer leg for me to eat. The more I thought, the hungrier my stomach became. I had to wipe the copious drool from the corners of my mouth with my sleeve. As I walked, thinking of the meal, I quickly arrived before a gigantic cave entrance. Inside the deep cave, the light was dazzling, but it was strange. Just now, the light seemed not far, but now it was deep inside the mountain cave. Was I seeing things because I was hungry? Lured by the fragrant deer leg in my imagination, I stepped into the cave, shuffling my feet into the deep dark end. Suddenly, I discovered that the space inside the mountain was immensely vast, and the scene before me burst into dazzling brightness. Suddenly, I saw 5 or 6 young girls walking side by side, laughing and talking. It was clearly summer, but they were all wearing splendid antique-style sheepskin coats, unlike the fashion of the time. Only one of them wore a season-appropriate blue khaki jacket with 2 braids, and a canvas bag slung across her shoulder, printed with the words, "Serve the people." Oh, wasn't that Tian Xiaomeng? Yes, it was Tian Xiaomeng, an educated youth from Suzhou. Fatty Tuyen and I were both from Fujian. Although we were both Southerners, we weren't really that close. The main reason was that Fatty Tuyen and I were too mischievous and always causing trouble, so honest, kind girls rarely dared to be near us. But meeting an acquaintance in this strange cave made me feel a little more secure. I quickly ran up and called out, "Xiaomeng, why are you here? Is there anything to eat?" Xiaomeng turned around, saw me, and waved, indicating for me to come closer. I stepped forward and said to her, "You're having a fun time here, aren't you? We almost became bear food looking for you. Where is this place anyway? Do you have anything to eat? My stomach is completely empty." Xiaomeng replied, "I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. I went into Lama Valley to gather medicine, but got lost. Luckily, these kind ladies helped me. Later, they're even putting on a shadow puppet play. You've come at the perfect time, let's stay and watch for a bit before going back." With that, she introduced me to the young girls next to her. These girls all spoke with local accents, and each was extremely polite. They even invited me to eat dried venison and urged me to watch the play with them. I followed the girls deeper inside, only to see a magnificent red, towered purple, gated city amidst the vast cave, brightly lit with lanterns and torches. Antiques and treasures were piled up everywhere like mountains. A large white screen was stretched before the city gate, behind which more than a dozen musicians played gongs and drums. In front was an antique-style long table on which sat teapots and teacups, each item exquisitely crafted. There was also a red agate tray filled with fruits and various dim sum. 3 chairs were placed in front of the table. The girls in fur coats invited Tian Xiaomeng and me to sit in the 2 left and right chairs, leaving the middle chair empty, as if awaiting another important person. Tian Xiaomeng saw there were only 3 chairs, and everyone else was standing behind, so she felt it was improper and hesitated, declining the offer. As for me, I was tired and hungry, and didn't feel like being polite. After all, the mountains and rivers belonged to the people. If there was a seat, it didn't matter who sat there. So I proudly sat down and immediately started devouring the food in front of me. But perhaps because I was too hungry, the meticulously prepared food tasted bland and flavorless, like chewing on candle wax. After a few bites, the more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. At that moment, 2 maidens helped an old woman, frail and white, haired like hemp, yet exuding an air of nobility, out from a large door and led her to the middle chair. Tian Xiaomeng and I both stood up and bowed to the hostess. Looking at her appearance, I found her even stranger. What era was this, to still have such a noble woman? The old woman nodded back at us, then sat down and watched the play intently without saying a word. The young girl attending by her side clapped once, and the performers and musicians of the troupe, hearing the signal, exerted themselves in their performance. Shadow puppetry originated in the Han and Tang dynasties and was also called lamp shadow play. It was a highly popular form of performance art. People would cut out characters and animals from stories using donkey hide or cardboard. The performers would then manipulate them while singing, playing gongs and drums behind a white screen. To this day, there are hundreds of thousands of different acts. However, during the Cultural Revolution, this art form could not escape injustice. People criticized this play for spreading absurd propaganda about talented scholars and beautiful women, emperors and ministers, calling it toxic garbage. So no one dared to perform it anymore. I never dreamed that I would see this here. In this era where cultural life was practically non-existent, puppet shows were truly fascinating, and I became engrossed, forgetting everything else. The acts were all wonderfully unique. First was Emperor Taizong's dream journey to Guanggan Palace, followed by Di Qing captures Kunlun Pass at night. On the screen, swords flashed and spears gleamed, soldiers moved back and forth. Vibrant colors, combined with the encouraging drums and trumpets, made the audience clap endlessly. I watched until my head spun and my mouth was dry. I reached for the teacup on the table and took a sip. Suddenly, I glanced at the old woman beside me and saw her eyes narrowed in a smile, eating food from the table. However, her manner of chewing was exceedingly bizarre. Her cheeks puffed out like an old ape's, grinding each piece slowly. My grandmother, when she got old, also lost her teeth, but she never ate like that. Was this old woman a human or a monkey? In my confusion, the teacup in my hand suddenly fell to the ground and shattered. A broken teacup was nothing terrifying, but even more horrifying was that the old woman's head also fell right off, her two eyes still staring intently at the stage, her mouth still chewing ceaselessly. The maidens rushed over, respectfully picked up the head, and reattached it to her body. Filled with terror, I quickly pulled Tian Xiaomeng and ran out of the cave entrance. Fumbling in the pitch black night, we staggered out of the cave. In our ears, thunderous rumblings echoed as the ground shook violently beneath our feet. The cave behind us had already closed into a giant stone wall. If we had been half a minute later, we surely would have been crushed to death in that rock face. Outside, the sky had brightened. I led Tian Xiaomeng to the stream bank at the foot of the mountain, but suddenly my stomach cramped painfully, and sweat poured down my forehead. I had to sit down, clutching my belly. I remembered my grandfather once telling me that ghosts and demons often transform rocks, pebbles, worms, and toads into delicacies to trick people into eating them. I didn't know what kind of demonic thing I had eaten earlier. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to vomit. Finally, I couldn't hold it in and threw up violently. In my agony, I vaguely saw two people approaching from a distance. The girl in front looked somewhat familiar. It was Yanzi. Seeing her arrive, I finally felt truly at ease. My vision blurred and I passed out. When I woke up, it was 3 days later. That day, Yanzi and Fadi Tuyan had stayed in the tree until dawn, and the man, bear at the base of the tree, had died from excessive blood loss. However, they searched everywhere but couldn't find any trace of me, and unexpectedly found Tian Xiaomeng and me by the stream. For the past 3 days, I had been unconscious, with a high fever over 40 degrees. Fadi Tuyan had to run 100 miles through the mountains to invite a doctor from the county to treat me. Fortunately, I had good health, so I eventually regained consciousness. But Tian Xiaomeng remained in a naive, unconscious state from beginning to end, so her family had to be notified to take her home for treatment. What happened to her afterward, none of us knew clearly. I recounted everything to Yanzi's father. He said there was a legend in this area that after the empress died, many artisans and folk troops were buried with her. In the past, some people who went to Buffalo Heart Mountain had similar experiences to ours. However, in my memory, those events were very hazy. Sometimes, I wasn't even sure if they had truly happened. I was an educated youth for just over half a year, but those memories will never fade. In the spring of 1969, it was my turn to return home to visit my family, and my life began to change from that point on.